Hi, everyone. Hi, students. Me again. My name is Shannon Jackson. I'm Associate Vice Chancellor for the Arts and Design, and it's my privilege to welcome you to the second in our Wednesday spring series focused on the theme of California countercultures. Some of you understand this concept, understand what the format is, but for those who are new or those who need a refresh, I'm here to make sure that you know the concept of what we're doing. It's in fact an open lecture series embedded inside of a course piloted last year to expose students of all majors to the arts and design across the Berkeley campus and beyond the Berkeley campus. It seeks to expose students to a wide number of creative forms across the visual art, architecture, the performing arts, and more, and to make sure that they have a thematic connection that keeps this exposure and peripatetic syllabus unified. And this year we're using the theme of California countercultures as a way to respond in part to the Hippie Modernism exhibition, which is slated to open next week, as well as to create points of contact between the students and offerings at Cal Performances, in the Art Practice Department, in the College of Environmental Design, and many more. And to make sure that many of our faculty, those who are teaching this course, as well as those who are entering at key moments, have a chance to share their deep knowledge about different creative practices, and in this case, the role of countercultural movements and social movements in motivating arts in California. So whatever your major, and there are many majors in this group right here, and some undeclared freshmen, the hope is to make sure that students think of the arts as part of their lives, part of their undergraduate experience, but also an experience that they'll carry with them and continue throughout life well beyond graduation. And by embedding this public lecture series inside of the course, we're inviting a wider community to join once a week, and also to make sure that we can create a kind of intergenerational assembly around issues and values that we all care about. The project then is a course, a lecture series, and also an arts access program, and it's been made possible at our defunded public university that maintains our public values by the generosity of a range of organizations, including the Mellon Foundation and Cal Performances, also Lisa and Douglas Goldman, who support the Big Ideas Courses program, and by the Arts and Design Initiative, which I am privileged to lead. Together, we're making it possible to create this kind of exciting, unwieldy, and potent, robust format for all of you, and we hope to continue it and expand it in years to come. It is lucky that we have Michael Cohen and Natasha Boaz as the ringleaders of this incredible operation, and that we have embedded inside this series such exciting speakers as the one that I know Michael is privileged to introduce to you now. So, Michael, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to make a couple of announcements in general, and then I'll introduce tonight's to midday's speaker. Let me just start by, the students down on the front here all have access to the syllabus. They know where the readings are. They have redundant technological resources to access this course. But those of you who are in the back, the civilians, as we think of in the academic world, or anyone who is not actually enrolled in this class can still access what's going on in this course through a number of aspects, one of which is new that we've just constructed, and it's this website, which is essentially I'm going to scroll here, so be careful. This is essentially the course syllabus as projected onto a website. Now, the website is, if you go to medium.com, which is a commercial-free publishing website that we're going to use in this class in various ways. But if you go to it's simply, you can see the URL, medium.com/California-countercultures, one word. You can then get access to the entire syllabus, with images, links here to the various aspects in terms of the BAM PFA, the reading list, and indeed if you can. These links should be live. You should actually be able to download the readings if you want to do them. The Wednesday visitors are not required to do homework in order to participate. We simply are happy to have you join us. These folks all have homework, but if you want to read along, that's part of what is going on here. And so you can see that there's all the various aspects, and the entire, I think what we have generated, what Natasha Boas and I have generated, is a very coherent, clear kind of line covering what we think of as the history of California countercultures. We are really just getting started here, but we will proceed through hippies and Pynchon and the Lab and a whole the Black Panther Party. Ishmael Reed will be here. A number of other sort of exciting opportunities. And so yes, this is a good place for you to access. I'll stop scrolling and making all of you blind. And it starts with the image that we've started the course with here, the map, the countercultural map. The second, so that's medium.com/California-countercultures, and you can find that material. A number of announcements. There are a whole series of things tied into this course, in particular a film series and the museum exhibition. And so I want to just make reference to that, the first of which is not directly attached to this class, but is absolutely essential because it should be attached to this class, is that the PFA is showing in what is, in my mind, the greatest war movie ever made. The Battle of Algiers, the Bataille d'Alger, made by Giro Pontecorvo in 1966. And that will be screened at the PFA. I'm looking at the date here on Saturday the 4th. All of you students, this is the most highly recommended. You can certainly write it, and to everyone who has not already seen it, I guess you know what you're doing on Saturday night. Beyond Battle of Algiers, though, of course, there is a full-scale film series that will be held here that begins on February 7th with the experimental films of Jordan Belson and will continue through D.A. Pennebaker, Haskell Wexler, Emile D'Antonio, and I would say if there's any, I think this is a fantastic film series. The students get free tickets to these movies. You don't, I'm sorry. But, support the PFA and buy a ticket to see Emile D'Antonio's The Year of the Pig. I think one of the most harrowing films about Vietnam. And the war in Vietnam in particular. William Greaves, Godard, because where would the 60s in film be without Godard? The Maisel brothers, Zabriskie Point, and a number of extremely important documentaries about Black Power, in particular Staggered Lee and the murder of Fred Hampton, The Space is the Place, all of these, I think, spectacular films that are very much tied into this. And then, of course, what we're all really, in many respects, waiting for is the opening of the Hippie Modernism show, which opens officially on Tuesday, February 7th. The students in particular are invited to an opening show, which will be you're invited to come on that Tuesday between 7 and 10 p.m. To be some of the first people to participate in the show. A number, apparently, of the artists and curators and others will be there. So this is a good opportunity for folks to dig their heels into the show that you can actually see as you come in and out as it's going up. I think there's something wonderful about actually being able to watch the show get put up, even if you have to stare through the metal grates. So there's those are the main announcements, right? So there's the website, there's the film series, there's the exhibition, and all of which, once that is open, then this class will be fully up and running, and we're taking the time before that opens to give what we think of as a fair, certain measure of background to what's going on, and in that, I want to introduce then today's speaker, Iain Boal. Now, I will say Ian's actually one of the first people I met when I moved here to Berkeley, and it's a great pleasure to sort of loop back around and have him speak here. But Iain is an Irish social historian of science, technology, and culture, whose primary cultural academic output is created through a series of collective intellectual projects or collective intellectual enterprises. He is himself, he's beyond bicoastal. He is, I would think of him as a trans-hemispheric scholar working out of London and Berkeley in various, in and through various institutions here at Berkeley. He has in the past been associated particularly with the geography department at Santa Cruz and various other departments and programs, but he's a peripatetic independent scholar and bears all of the virtues of that lack of specific institutional grounding. like I said, his intellectual pursuits are largely collective in the sense that he's been associated for years with the Retort Collective here in the Bay Area that has published broadsheets, pamphlets, and in particular, I think, a masterful book called Afflicted Powers, Capital and Spectacle in a New Age of War, which was published by Verso collectively between Iain Boal, Tim Clark, Joseph Matthews, and Michael Watts. That was a ferocious intellectual engagement in the post 9/11 world. He's also the author and co-editor of, let me just scroll up because the cover of the book is here and you can't see that far, West of Eden, Communes and Utopia in Northern California, which is, I think, a fascinating history of the history of communes in Northern California in particular, and the sort of radicalism that comes with that, an attempt to genuinely build a human utopia on real ground in Northern California. In his own sense, Iain is the founder of what he calls agentology. Is that correct? Agentology? What is it? What's the right word? Agnotology. Forgive me. I am going to get the definition right if I can't pronounce it correctly. Agnotology is defined as the study of ignorance and the long shadows cast by the Enlightenment. This is a term that Iain has coined himself and explores in great detail. And I would love to call myself a professor of agnotology. It's deeply respectable. There's something, something wonderful about that. In particular, part of this is his work in terms of humans, technology, and the like. And he is the author of a book that has been released but will be forthcoming called The Green Machine, A History of the Bicycle in Planetary Perspective. And as part of that, he's also been a part of a series of art shows really around the world, art shows as a curator and a participant at the Tate Modern in London, but also particularly in the Yerba Buena, shows around Mark Lombardi, Mark Dion, his own shows grounded around the history of the bicycle, one show in particular that was co-curated by our own Natasha Boas. So everything gets to come fully around in circle. Today's talk by Iain Boal will be called On the Left Edge, the Renegade Tradition in California. So please help me in welcoming Iain Boal.
Thanks very much. Michael, is that?
That's mine. That is yours. There it is. You're good to go.
Thank you.
Let me get out of your way.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Natasha. Welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this lunchtime. On the left edge. I'll just start by, but I should say that after my remarks, the idea is it will open up an exchange, and we have until 1:30, but I know some of you might have to get back to work, perhaps earlier. But I hope as many of you can stay for the conversation that I hope these remarks will prime. I'm showing, it's a lantern show under four heads, four themes which interanimate, keywords, and I'll give them to you now. Counter spaces, and by space here I mean both physical and imaginative space. The frontier, California is frontier, and the dialectic of frontier. Frontier typically is given an undialectical, bimodal interpretation. It's a space of death, that was certainly true. But let's not forget it's also a space of freedom. And those who, our masters who were planning the enclosed technocratic utopia that America became, very much didn't want that other, those other activities on the frontier to have much visibility, where the red and the black and the white came together in what they regarded as quite often a space of freedom. So that'll be one motif. That's the second one. Thirdly, again, the dialectic of autonomy and heteronomy. In my own thinking and putting this together in the work on counter worlds, counter spaces, and coming from an anti-authoritarian perspective, I've always liked the framework used by a great Greek partisan, Cornelius Castoriadis, who ended up as a Brussels Eurocrat, but gave his last, before he died, gave his last interview with me in Berkeley years ago. I've lost the tape, sadly. But he came here to theorize, as a psychoanalyst as he was, to theorize the magma, which was the kind of geological metaphor he used, the magma, the psychic magma, out of which some of these crazy schemes emerged, if that's what you want to call them. In other words, for Castoriadis, his activity was all aimed at getting out of other people's projects, living his life inside the time and space of other people. You know, we are willy-nilly, you know, Victorians, Edwardians, you know, living under Reagan, living under whatever. So the move from, if you like, heteronomy, where you're in somebody else's project, to autonomy. And he saw ancient Athens, a slaveocracy as it was, as a brave attempt at autonomy, at, as it were, self-foundation. And of course, many people think of America that way too. And then fourthly, none of what you see here, I think, can avoid the issue of this great movement of history, capitalist modernity, whose project is smashing the commonages of the world. And the drumbeat for centuries now that has ushered in the reign of the commodity and private property. So it's a kind of cartographic project, and I liked Michael's fractalized map there to begin with. There is no such thing as an innocent map. Maybe this is a good quote to start with as well. So this is Oscar Wilde in his great essay, The Soul of Man Under Socialism. This is right at the moment soon after the foundation of one of the two major realized cooperative utopias that I'm going to examine and show pictures of right now. On the other hand, again, Utopia has its opponents, not least Charles Marx, who said, who was withering about writing recipes for the cookbooks, for the cookshops of the future. He didn't think that was any business of ours, those in the present, but it's hard not to challenge that assessment. Utopia, which of course is one of the key words in the whole of this project this spring, is coined by Thomas More in 1516, more or less the same year as Machiavelli is publishing his Vade Mecum for bourgeois authoritarianism, The Prince. and at the same time as the Spanish crown and its agents are pushing into the high plateaus of Mexico with their ungulates to rearrange the landscape. This is Holbein Jr. Utopias typically, and this is well known, always they're either perfectly square or circular. They have 30,000 people or whatever it is. It's always round numbers, and often many utopias, of course, are dystopic. They're somebody's nightmare. This is a famous woodcut that's actually clearly based on existing maps, projected maps of real, fictional, non-existent places. This is before the draining of Mexico City. This is a map that exactly about the time of Holbein Jr. And here's another one that he would have been familiar with of the lagoon in Venice. And we used it for West of Eden. Lisa Thompson, the designer, is in the audience. Hello, Lisa. And also I should say that Cal Winslow, one of the other editors, is also with us. A shout out to Cal. And I want to also just note that there's some nice work in the background there. If you look at Holbein's image from the early 16th century, some nifty photoshopping by Mona Caron, the muralista from San Francisco. Some of you will know her fabulous murals. Has messed around in the background so that actually this turns out to be a view pretty much from the Berkeley hillside if you look across. And that's not the... So Mount Tam is there, the sacred Omphalos. Who would have thought that Holbein knew that? And of course there's a bridge in there we're faking around. The whole reason for the, beyond that curiosity that we all know so well, for the invasion of the New World, a lot of it was aimed at, without knowing when they set out, at this mountain, Potosi in Peru, then Peru, now Bolivia. This is more or less a mountain of solid silver. Tens, maybe hundreds of thousands lost their lives extracting silver that was bound for the old world. Again, it was the principalities of Europe that set this in motion. But actually, in world historical terms, it seems to be forces even larger and more global. That is to say, the need for bullion, for silver in the Middle Kingdom. The breakdown of social trust means the end of credit, and that means you need bullion. And the demand for bullion from China had repercussions all the way to the Pacific littoral. This is one of the most grotesque episodes in the history of mining and extraction. And it's a story that's often told. But Potosi, of course, has gone into, not of course, but Potosi has gone into language as a metonym, as a synecdoche or whatever for fabulous wealth. Here's a very early map of North America, and one of the earliest cartographic depictions of California on the left edge, as it were. California is an island. And we're also, I should another shout out to John Gillis, who's in the audience. John, who the great historian of islands and insularity, and indeed of coasts and the human shore, and is helping us rethink world history from that perspective. And I think in California we would do well to have it be very clear that the history we need to, the song we need to sing to ourselves is one of the terraqueous globe. Not so much continental thinking or just maritime, but in fact to do it all together in a terraqueous way. On the other coast, on an island, on Roanoke Island, an early colony sent from England disappeared when John White arrived to find the colonists of Roanoke. Famously, all he found etched in the tree was the strange word Croatan or Croatoan, which is the name of another island and possibly also a group of Algonquian indigenes who disappeared. Nobody quite knows where. The lost colony. But again, this would be part of the story of retelling the story of a frontier in a more dialectical way. That was a lost colony. I'm going to talk just briefly now about two colonies that actually happened, and because they happened, it can happen again. Moving back to the west coast, again, this is a kind of a banal map under the sign of the AAA. The ideology of automobilism holds sway. It's a grim map in many ways, I guess, unless you're going skiing in a hurry. But what is worth noting is that at the same latitude, you'll see Sebastopol and Santa Rosa, just one, more or less 1 day's horse ride, the last link on the Camino Real from Mexico, as the Crown and the Cross push their way north for the pillage of the continent, meeting the Russian Empire coming south. So Sebastopol, in a way, is the most southerly edge of the Russian Empire coming south, meeting the Spanish going north. The penultimate mission, of course, in St. Francis, in San Francisco itself. When news of the, this is long after Potosi, but when news of the gold and the silver in the Sierras come, there's a rush, of course, and here's the famous forest of ships at the tip of the peninsula as people flood into California. And that story, of course, is one that's easily rehearsed. We have to thank Gray Breckin and Bob Dawson for the story of telling the story of California as, in a way, as a series of pulses of not just genocide but resource strikes. First coming for the pelts, and then the gold and the silver, and of course displacing the indigenes. And here's a relaxing contingent of officers after the Modoc Wars in the 1870s. It's all rather recent. The Modoc band has retreated to the lava beds, and they hold out heroically for a while, but it doesn't last. And then, of course, this is a story all over the West. Some of those officers end up, and soldiers end up working in the extractive industries, of course, among the big trees. And this is where I just briefly tell the story of a group of renegades under the direction of a San Francisco lawyer and socialist. The great and strange character, Burnett Haskell, and his colleagues, who decide that they will set up an egalitarian utopia in a new mountain home on the North Fork of the Kaweah River, and what is now in the national parks of Sequoia. Very little remains. The road that goes down to extract the logs, because it was a productive utopia. They were inspired by Marx and Bellamy and and others who understood that you have to make a living. And it's quite a famous story. They go to the land office individually, and they make a claim for contiguous lots. So this is typically what the town plan would look like for the gridding of North America, for the enclosure of the continent. And it was all rather suspicious because they gave the same address in San Francisco, but they managed to get contiguous lots, and that allowed them to set up the Kauai Cooperative Commonwealth in the 1880s. And here's a photograph of some of them. A strange motley crew of socialists, anarchists, spelling reformers, vegetarians, and one could go on. And they're standing by this, what was the largest living thing on Earth at that point, which they named the Karl Marx tree. When they were chased out by the cavalry ultimately, and after the enclosure of the park of the land by emparkment, and notice that in that sense, when we talk about the common lands of the indigenous peoples, you've got to remember that at the moment of emparkment, at the signing of the bills, which save large chunks of our continent from development in a certain way, that is also an act of criminalization of the commoners, those who are gathering in the understory, the ferns, the mushrooms, the downwood, the means of life. The right to common is extinguished, and the parks become public. So let's be a bit careful about just the valorization of the word public. Public is not the same as common. It's an important and very tense, I think, an interesting set of questions raised about that necessary opposition between things that are held in common and things that are public. A common, that is to say, has an outside. The right to the fruits of particular bits of the surface of the earth under commons regimes are limited. The tragedy of the commons, which was devised in California as a ideological manifesto for late capitalism, is a bit of a nonsense. But we can come back to that perhaps in conversation. The extinction of the Kauai colony took a while. There was an enormous amount of work they did, and I should say, it was in that sense. It was these were not what would you call regular, the lazy hippie of the notorious lazy hedonistic hippie. They were not. The three prime industries will be, and I'm quoting from the Nationalist. Nationalist, this is not in the normal sense of nationalism, but the socialist sense, as it were, as in nationalization. The three prime industries in Kauai were lumbering and woodwork of all kinds, marble quarrying and marble work of every description, fruit growing, drying, and packing. And there was ample water power. Money was abolished. There were time checks. The cent was replaced by the minute of your time, because we only go through this life once. I speak for only those of you who believe that. So, one's life energy is all there is, and it was therefore a non-fluctuating currency. And here we go. The main purpose of the colony is to put in practical operation a system which can extend until it embraces the whole world. So these were ambitious people. The plans of such a system have been tabulated and talked of for years, but no attempt has been made to operate on a scale as broad as that adopted at Kauai. There are no social or religious idiosyncrasies to excite prejudice, and no opportunities for speculation to awaken cupidity. The utmost liberty of thought and action is permitted, restriction being applied only when the rights and privileges of others are infringed or jeopardized. Under these conditions, it is hoped that the most perfect manhood and womanhood will be attained. brute passion surrendering to moral restraint, and men learning to, quote, become a law unto themselves. That's Castoriadis's autonomy, the move from heteronomy to autonomy. Now that's the Kauai colony. It was too much of a threat, and as I say, the state came after them. Emparkment happened, and eventually the cavalry came in to get rid of the remnants. They sued for the value of the logs that they could no longer extract, but that didn't work. Here's a happy group of Kauaians living on a stump. And here is an aerial photo of the road. Some of you have been on that road down in Kings Canyon and Sequoia. The old colony mill road, it's a staggering amount of work done by hand by these colonists. I want to go south now to look at another famous and even more short-lived experiment. Again, I hate to use experiment because they weren't really experimenting. It was the real thing. It's often said that they were experimenting. I never like to say that I was experimenting with drugs. I wasn't. I was doing them, and that was not an experiment. The ecstatic. So this is down south in the on the edge of the Mojave Desert. Half a generation later, May Day 1914. A man who had Job Harriman, who'd run for the vice presidency with Eugene Debs, and was the sworn enemy of Otis, the people who ran the LA Times and ran LA pretty much. Harriman again was a Marxist, a socialist, a lawyer like Haskell in San Francisco, and particularly after the bomb went off in 1911, he essentially gave up on politics and decided to found a utopian colony in Antelope Valley. Water was not plentiful. He had negotiated for some water rights, but ultimately that was the problem that they came up against, the water problem. They were cut off from the water that was diverted away from them. It lasted just a very few years, perhaps 4 years. But it was again very ambitious, and what they did in the 4 years was rather remarkable. He called in a radical feminist architect, Austin, Alice Constant Austin, who, again, notice the shape of her utopia. Right? They're always geometrical and platonic, it seems. The Kauaians less so, but both of these colonies started in tents, and they had big plans. In her socialist city to come, Austin anticipated labor-saving devices in the home and an underground central laundry and kitchens where women would be relieved of, quote, of the thankless and unending drudgery of an inconceivably stupid and inefficient system by which her labors are confiscated. She regarded the traditional home as a Procrustean bed to which, quote, each feminine personality must be made to conform by whatever maiming or fatal spiritual or intellectual oppression. So this is somebody who meant business. And she arranged administrative buildings, restaurants, churches, schools, markets in a circular plan. That's the standard utopian stuff. Houses were actually going to be concrete. She was a modernist, laid out in rows with alternative facades based on individual taste. So there's the question of the dialectic of individuality and collectivity, which is an ongoing and unsolvable perhaps problem within the general autonomy, heteronomy tension. As it turns out, this never got built. There were quite a lot of buildings were built. She created communal creches, daycare areas, and designed easy-to-clean furniture, no crevices for dust, and roll-away beds and heated tile floors, which is one of our personal utopias up there on Arch Street. Now, the communards at Llano del Rio did not embrace the ideas. They rejected them as too prison-like, they thought, the plans. But before that argument could be played out, they were choked off from the water, and the unhappy campers. But they had some good days. Here's a group of them. That looks pretty fun. And I like this one too. Lots of willing workers at the industrial school. It was essentially an agricultural and artisanal, agricultural, horticultural, and artisanal utopia. Note the teamster. This is the girl behind the horses there, showing equality of sexes as well as equal suffrage at Llano. They will have lots to do with harvesting the garden produce this summer. They had very poor results with the almonds early on. We're planning to put that right. The alfalfa was very successful. It's a very interesting, quote, experiment. They're also big on community singing. This guy looks... they had some surrealists there among and yeah, all that's left here, those of you who've been to the edge of the Mojave, like a lot of, as we know from the 20th century and the history of terror from the air, we know this is a landscape that is rather familiar, where all you've got left, as in the big fire of 91, for example, are some chimney stacks in the desert. There's so much more one could say, but I must rush on. It feels like, as the Chinese say, looking at flowers from horseback. I'm going to jump now to a technocratic utopia. This is a sketch drawn in the late 50s, early 60s, for plans, a part of the Atoms for Peace program. The terraforming, shall we say. Can anyone recognize where this is? Yes. Well done, yeah. So this is Marin looking south. This is the Marin Headlands modified by an atomic weapon. This is a sketch done in an architectural office in San Francisco. One of the things that the historian of utopias, and in fact historians in general, have to do is somehow not necessarily be sympathetic, but not to be immediately to close off, to declare as crazy or mad or bad or sad a utopia like this, in which it was seriously suggested people were spending time in offices planning the development of the Marin Headlands by means of nuclear weapons. This, of course, is in a way a kind of a developer's paradise, utopia, the little boxes. One could tell the story of the contrarians of the Berkeley hillside looking down, Ariel Parkinson, Sylvia McLaughlin and others, particularly those who looked down over the bay and saw the plans for it to be filled in. Again, Gray Breckin is the great historian of San Francisco Undone. Those who have the Renegades and Awkward Squad who pushed back against the various capitalist utopias, often their victories are negative ones. They're hard to celebrate. It's the sort of dog that didn't bark in the night, the thing that didn't get made. I mean, if do you see what's going on here? This was a serious plan to fill in almost all of the bay. And indeed, is it not true that underwater lots were auctioned off? Is that not? I think that's true. And were never redeemed because it's not actually happened. But there again, of course, we're living in a world in which we know that if Jim Hansen and his cohort, if their calculations are correct about the melting of the Antarctic ice sheet, we can expect all coastal civilizations to be inundated. A large proportion of the world's largest cities will be underwater before that long, and there, of course, will be then a new set of problems. I just want to gesture at that moment after Hiroshima and the explosion in the desert, and the technocratic ideas of a utopia using the weapons. I just want to sort of to gesture to two students in the class of 47 at Berkeley High. In order to understand post-war California utopianism, and of course it's not just California. I think in that mapping, it would be well for you to know the work of Ursula Le Guin and Philip Dick. Le Guin was the daughter of the Crobers. She was born on Arch Street and always claimed that her parents' dislike of electricity and the steady disillusioning light of the kind that we get here. Growing up with an imagination fueled by candle and firelight, the play of flame in the darkness was very important to her, and her anarcho-feminist utopias, I think, are very, very important. And Philip Dick never more, I think, relevant. As somebody who understood what had happened on this hillside, the design of the weapons of Armageddon. I just want to say that one of the reasons that the young people can enjoy the Embarcadero at San Francisco, it's well known, some of you won't know that there was until very recently a half-finished freeway there, and the freeway revolt is rather like Save the Bay. It was, ordinary people refusing the blueprints of technocratic planners. Every social order secretes a spatial order. Capitalist modernity and its signature built forms, the factory, the office tower, the suburb, the freeway, the shopping mall, the power station, are artifacts that trace a specific spatial logic: dispossession and enclosure, separation of production and reproduction, the priority of circulation and consumption, intense concentrations of energy. The cadastral survey of North America in the late 18th century, for the purposes of land speculation, think back to the grid that you saw, have left its telltale grid familiar to passengers flying across the continent. This isn't to say that our society, or any imaginable one, is reducible to a spatial regime or is straightforwardly legible. Far from it. In times of social crisis, especially, the carapace of the dominant order is unable to contain new forms of life, new social relations. They burst through the received categories and offend the bureaucrat's register of conforming use. Quite typically, they will be misrepresented. Sometimes they elude representation altogether, visual or otherwise. They're likely to be assigned to older, established genre, in the same way that a new medium will first be envisaged in terms of an older one, say television as theatre, or the car as horseless carriage, or photographic plate as canvas. The observer is hard-pressed at such moments to interpret the new thing they are witnessing. Language itself lags behind. Novel idioms have to be coined to reflect these unpredicted eruptions onto the scene. Sit-in, acid test, guerrilla theatre, critical mass, scratch-eaty, pop-up, Occupy X. It's hardly accidental that this list denotes activities that take place either in the open air or in spaces refunctioned for unauthorized purposes. The response of the state and its enforcers varies according to the reckoned threat to its authority. The worldwide movement of the squares quickly received a sharp lesson in the politics of space, as did the communards of the 60s later on. Morning Star, the iconic hinterland commune near Occidental, was bulldozed 3 times for violations of code wars, specifically for what its founder, Lou Gottlieb, an ethnomusicologist and stand-up comic, when he was told that he was being charged with organized camping, he said, "If you can show me any element of organization, I shall be very, very surprised." During the pulse of radical energies, codenamed the 60s, dissenters sallied forth into the streets and the parks of San Francisco from improvised communal spaces, from the refunctioned warehouses and the apartments in Haight-Ashbury left empty by those fleeing to the suburbs. They found themselves criminalized both inside and out. This freeway resistance is interesting. Again, we must be alert to the dialectic of history. Going back to the moment of the Kauai colony, as the colonists were driving the road down through the big trees for the extraction and the logging, the great San Francisco bicycle protest of '96 took place. Maybe 100,000 spectators viewing the parade of cyclists who were demanding, guess what? Better roads. Now, of course, it's easy now for the cyclists who depend on the paving of the planet, which has happened, and they depend on that surface for the efficiency of the bicycle to be such. That has history comes back to bite you quite often. Here they are, an interesting family. I don't know how on earth that is going to work if they go in different directions there. That's mother and father with the baby in Golden Gate Park. The open air question, the spaces of dissent, the counter spaces. You had to get permission in the parks to speak freely, to body forth the imaginings of a counter world. Ron Davis of the mime troupe was arrested for doing unauthorized theatre in the park. There's a Black Panther coming as one of the shows from the park. The sadly departed Dean of California and Communitarian Studies, when I asked him to talk about this pulse of radical energies that came out in Oakland, and the Panther households, the free speech movement, everything that we associate with the 60s around Berkeley. And I asked him, Jeff Lustig, I said, Jeff, could you write something in the West of Eden for the book about the conditions of possibility? What was it? Not just this history, because a lot of this history is already covered over and people didn't remember it. Jeff brilliantly said, well, he thought it was the presence of these great common public spaces. He didn't distinguish perhaps that between those two. The Golden Gate Park and the campus on this side of the bay. Now the struggles against the war and the Asian American struggles, the civil rights, the Black Power movement, all this was part of the urban scene. There were, of course, plenty who simply turned their back and went to in a different way to the 19th century, not with massive blueprints in their pockets, but did go to the countryside to do this kind of work. This is a famous 19th century painting of women gleaning. The word gleaning refers to the fruits of the earth that are available after harvest, that the rights of commoners to what's left over after harvest. And they had to rediscover it themselves in the Central Valley, very informally. Because, of course, once the commoning cultures had been smashed in the indigenous commoning cultures, then the lights came on all at once, as Williams said, and they had to make do. And so that's a story that we can't go into here, but there's a kind of, here's a band, a tribe of rusticators up on the coast at Albion. And they're rejecting the little boxes and a certain kind of romancing of the red man, although they're also using stuff from the lumber yard, and again, rehearsing in their own way the Kauai colonists who are living on the big stumps. These are the smaller stumps. This is probably maybe not even old growth. This might be second growth. And you'll be getting more in the course and elsewhere on the utopian form of the 60s counterculture, which hasn't survived very well, partly because it leaks in 64 places. And let's not also forget that they did become environmentalists, the rusticating back to the landers perforce. Often their hillsides were collapsing around them down into the creek. Stumps suck. That's not just somebody trying to make knowing what the labor involved in clearing a continent of the boles of the great wildwood that was North America. But of course, they're also, they're romancing the red man who has not gone, and then, interestingly, the island dystopia of Alcatraz was seized for 19 months by the Indians of all tribes. A huge inspiration. Again, it doesn't have to last very long. I mean, utopias can be brief and still fuel the imagination for the future. Remember that. And this was a huge inspiration, particularly for Fourth World struggles. And they were making common cause with the breakfast programs and other struggles in the city. Again, free breakfasts, free was the central slogan of some of the Haight-Ashbury hippies, the diggers. Free land, free love. But for the grandchildren of the Modoc, when they hear some white rusticator call for free land, that's a rather bitter pill to swallow. However, I just want to make a note here that the air, the electronic air, the electromagnetic spectrum, a very important part of the whole of this story post-war, is the University of the Air that Lawrence Ferlinghetti said Pacifica Radio was, which was founded by a conscientious objector who spent time in the great woods of the West with others, semi-incarcerated members of the peace churches who refused to fight the good war. They weren't all resistors of the Second World War just because they refused to kill, like the Mennonites. Some of them were anarchists who had fought in Spain. It wasn't they refused to kill, it's just they didn't want to fight what they regard as an inter-imperialist rivalry. After the war, Lou Hill, the black sheep of the great Phillips petroleum fortune in Oklahoma, comes west, becomes an existentialist philosophy student at Stanford, and doesn't live to see the foundation of a great institution I just want to kind of shout out to here as we are in the museum. This is, does anyone recognize this? Yes, exactly. Frank Oppenheimer. Yeah, J. Robert Oppenheimer's smarter brother. No, well, he was a communist and hounded out of the academy. He worked on the bomb, on the Manhattan Project, and in a bid for redemption, decided to start an institution. Again, I'm very interested in the question of, counter spaces, spaces for these kinds of activities, and how ambitious they are. The extraordinary ambition of the 19th century foundations and the improvised DIY nature of the 60s communes. Both, much to say for them, I suppose. Anyway, Frank Oppenheimer founds the Exploratorium in a bid to trying to demystify science. But of course, the Manhattan Project was a secret project, the largest project in human history, techno-scientific, producing the weapons of Armageddon, as I say. And if you go to the Exploratorium in the old one, you could see the tinkering happening. A lot of it would be interesting to tell the story of tinkering, of bricolage, and try to get that right in terms of the mythos of the West and the startup in the garage in relation to the massive amount of federal money that comes in, that really was the condition of possibility for, the California miracle. Avionics, big computing. Later on, Fred Turner, who wrote a brilliant book, From Cyberculture to Counterculture, asked a tremendously productive question. How is it that the big IBM machine, a kind of a metaphor for soul murder and oppression, Big Brother, that within one generation the computer became the nimble icon of freedom and a utopian machine. From counterculture to cyberculture, Fred Turner. I believe he's on a panel. Is that right, Michael? Sorry. February 11, right here, probably right here, like here. Okay, Fred Turner, February 11. I'll let him tell the story. Yes, I'm particularly interested in the long twilight of automobilism. The final build out of the paving of the planet is happening right now. Again, it's a kind of a dystopia that we have. The air pollution in the Chinese cities yesterday. I was looking at a count. It's absolutely horrifying. Note that the bicycle, which was thought to be the machine that would bring, socialism will arrive on a bicycle, which was a great slogan from South America. The bicycle was always associated with a certain kind of contrarian, even socialism. One of the very first things that Hitler did on his accession to power in 1933 was to smash Solidarity, which was the cyclist union that could bring out 10,000 people in an afternoon on their bicycles. So the bicycle, which was invented as an end run around a global climate crisis in 1815, after the explosion of Tambora, immediately produces, unfortunately, with the internal combustion engine, produces the motorized quadricycle and the automobile, which has turned out to be something of a disaster. So again, this is the dialectic of history at work. We must be instruments of liberation are never can be. You can't read these things off the apparatus themselves. Once you, and I'm going to finish here with a quote, but once you bring the motor car to a halt, the two cities of El Norte, where the motor car has been banned, a bestiary of weird-ass forms has emerged, just as it did in the 1870s and 80s, interestingly. And I'm talking about Black Rock City, this is a photograph from Black Rock. Has anyone, who here has been out to Black Rock City in Nevada on the old Pleistocene lake bed? Burning Man, does that? Oh, okay. So one week a year, and that gives the pedal power and solar-assisted pedal power time, space to breathe. And the other is Christiania inside Copenhagen, where the cargo bike emerges. So keep an eye out on that. Black Rock City from the air looks like this. Remind you of anything? We're back to we're back to the old utopian form. So I'm just going to finish, and then we can open up for some exchange. I would like just to finish with by reading a paragraph here to you. Thank you for bearing with me. These are some remarks on the current situation in a way. Given the derealization of human collectivity under current conditions, I'm speaking particularly now of the virtual life and the spectacle, these brief eruptions of the kind I've been talking about produce real manifestations of community, albeit fleeting. Yet in each case, it's a move beyond the horizon of representational politics and takes life off the screen, if we're talking about the new techniques of communication, off the screen for a moment. Life, I think it must be concluded, under the reign of the commodity, cannot deliver on its promises. At least that's the wager that those who are declared enemies of the present have made, having a view of human powers and capacities from which it follows that the virtual life is a travesty. Similarly with the notion that the pinnacle of political participation is the vote, as if periodic ratification by ballot is anything other than embarrassment. It's bad enough to have masters, but to choose them is simply humiliating. The wager further implies that there is much at stake in the communist strategy, which I have been just alluding to, really. That is, on claiming back the commons. And I do insist that those who first inhabited this continent were communists in that sense. One can think of the common and the right of the common, if you like, as the anti-commodity. Not the denatured commons as defined by real estate agents and developers, green parks, open spaces, well-maintained roads, clean beaches, and so forth, although no doubt they're desirable. But rather rights of common that have use value in the traditional sense of providing livelihood and sustenance, food, energy, building materials, fodder, unpolluted water, all of nature's bounty. And these were the things that the renegades were after, no mistake. At the level of political spaces, it's also important, increasingly so. As the neoliberal world order goes deeper into crisis, it will be these other forms of commoning that will matter, mainly on the side of production. We will have to work together to produce our own lives. Basically, there's no one on the bridge, or nobody we want. We are just in the dawn of a time when we must reinvent a whole range of extinct commoning practices. Face-to-face gatherings in the open air to deliberate over this is one of the necessary beginnings. Utopia? Well, maybe not. Maybe certainly not. But Wallace Stevens is somewhere in the square to remind us the imperfect is our paradise. And then just the last words of a great book by, in my view, one of the great chroniclers and prognosticators of our time, or any other time, a man who took an English degree at Cornell, applied to do graduate mathematics at Berkeley, was turned down, Thomas Pynchon, and I know that Michael Cohen is a Pynchonite, but he has a strange aeronautical utopia, a gaseous Zeppelin, begins as Zeppelin, transmogrified Zeppelin utopia, and he ends by saying, inconvenience, which is the name of the craft, once a vehicle of sky pilgrimage, because in a way all these are sky journeys we're talking about, has transformed into its own destination, where any wish that can be made is at least addressed, if not always answered or granted. For every wish to come true would mean that in the known creation, good unsought and uncompensated would have evolved somehow. Good unsought and uncompensated would have evolved somehow to become at least more accessible to us. Now, no one aboard the inconvenience has yet observed any sign of this. It's not quite true. I think I've shown that there are signs, even on the ground. They know it's there, like an approaching rainstorm, but invisible. Soon they will see the pressure gauge begin to fall. They will feel the turn in the wind. They will put on their smoked goggles for the glory of what is coming to part the sky. They fly toward grace. Thank you very much. Some of you might have to nip away. I think we have time for an exchange. Natasha, yeah. Okay, and it's not a Q&A in that sense. It doesn't have to be questions. Rants, demurrers, rebuttals. Yeah.
You mentioned with regard to the Antelope Valley group that they fled in part in response to the 1911 bombing. You mean the bombing of the LA Times
Yes.
building? So were these then primarily anarchists who were taking a turn in their road and rusticating, or were they a more, multi-varied group?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. That's Joseph, one of the co-authors of Afflicted Powers there. Yeah, as I understand it, it's interesting. They set the membership at 1,000. They wanted people of all skills and none. It was explicitly, I think, socialist rather than anarchist, but I'm not sure. I'm not really a historian of the mix that showed up there? It's a very good question. The first season, they were just in tents. I mean, the word got out. They had a lot of supporters from all around the country who sent in money to help buy. It was 2,000 acres. It's a good question. Is anyone here, do we have by any chance an expert on Llano del Rio? No. What was your thinking on that? It was
Well, you mentioned the 1911 bombing, which was, a sort of an act at the height of anarchist political violence. And so if you're suggesting that it was a turn away from that or a response to that, was the core root?
Oh, I see. I don't know. Well, I know that was the thing that triggered eventually Joe Harriman's disgust with politics. Michael.
The bombing of the LA Times occurred actually in
10.
1910. And it was two Bridget structural iron workers who had been throwing strikes on the LA basin at that time. Job Harriman was, and they'd been arrested by private detectives. The McNamara brothers had been arrested by private detectives, extradited illegally back to Los Angeles, put on trial by Otis, and Clarence Darrow then comes in to defend them. Job Harriman staked a run for the Socialist Party ticket to win the mayoral race in Los Angeles.
In 11, was it?
This close in 11.
Yeah.
Correct.
Something like
And then,
43% or something staggering.
right, and on the first day of the trial, Darrow, who prioritized, in a sense, his opposition to the death penalty over victory in this case, pled the McNamara brothers guilty because, in fact, they were guilty. The Burns Detective Agency had all the dope on them.
They confessed even, didn't they?
They did in court.
In court.
They brought them in to confess
Okay.
to the deal they wanted to be executed. And what happened was that Harriman immediately loses the Socialist Party, it loses the election, socialism is discredited, Darrow is cast out from the left, and is then eventually brought on trial for perjury and trying to bribe a judge, bribe a member of the jury, and all of those largely socialists and trade unionists are the ones who flood out of the city and try and work on building this. So it's not anarchist violence. Of the bombs of the early 20th century, this is one of the very few ones that's actually not anarchist. The 1916, obviously, in San Francisco was Galleanistas and others. But my sense is that this commune is actually born of socialists who abandoned the party and trade unions who abandoned that kind of, in the midst of the most destructive, self-defeating betrayal, led to this kind of flight.
Thank you. No, that's great. That's very clarifying. Thank you, Joe. Yeah.
Iain, wonderful talk. Wonderful.
Thank you.
One of your asides here is your hostility to emparkment, and when Burns,
Don't you hate those parks?
enthralled the entire nation with the idea that the park is America's best ideal or idea, it occurs to me that your criticism of this ought to be taken into account, that the park is a kind of retreat, in fact, from these larger visions of real social and communal interaction. The park is really a retreat. It's really an imprisonment for the animals, and in that I include myself, or the human animal. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I couldn't have said it better. Does anyone else want to jump in on this? Because surely we've got some park defenders here. Oh, okay. Cal Winslow.
You might think of News from Nowhere, that utopian, which it seems to me offers a vision of humanity and nature in harmony, which is not a park.
Thank you. So now William Morris. Was no time to talk about the arts and crafts utopia and panoramic of the naturists up there. Thank you, Cal. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Binto, it's about 1:30, so can we make this the last one? Yes.
Your talk was amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
I think during these times, we actually need more of this information so that new seeds can kind of germinate. And I wanted to ask about, sorry, I have a little cold today, but I wanted to ask about are there some symptomatic kind of essential ingredients or symptoms that happen with the start of these kind of utopian groups or enterprises, and then are there some symptomatic or essential kind of ingredients that usually happen at the end for the fall, like whether it be the Panthers or any of these other utopian groups, like in your survey, have you seen some things that kind of unite them in their germination and also in their kind of unraveling or?
Yeah. Well, it's a really big topic. Thank you so much for that. I'll just say that it was very poignant at one of the gatherings that Cal and I and the others in the when we were doing the West of Eden, the ethnography of a kind. We brought together some of the old communards and wannabe communards, wondering how, where are the places we can go. I mean, the fact is that the flight to the suburbs did allow those, many households to get set up around the Panhandle. And the fact that the freeway revolt prevented the destruction of the Panhandle by the kind of, the 1939 World's Fair. We're still living in the rubble of a Caltrans utopia in that sense. But they stopped that, and so there was space. The containerization allows for allows for artists and others to take over the empty buildings. The chicken farmers, the Marxist chicken farmers of Petaluma, it didn't require big capitalization. But once the rural farmsteads were deserted, that was a place where, the rural commune could set up. So I think it's very historically specific. What were the big drivers of these things? I mean, some of these forces are truly global. I don't know whether I could really defend the case I just asserted, that it was the collapse of social trust in Asia that produced the catastrophe of Potosi, or the gold rush. But I think that what you've asked is the same question that in a way that I asked Jeff Lustig, and I think it's a really good one. What are the conditions of possibility? And young people coming to listen to these stories from the old communards saying, well, how can we do it? Where can we go? The ghost ship is a kind of classic. They're going to come after you. If you do something, the threat of a good example is very serious. Anyone who's done anything sort of countercultural, or just had a club or a pop-up, you learn very quickly with the Weberian iron cage that surrounds us bureaucratically that you're only open because they haven't shut you down. They'll find a way. They'll do it. The fire marshal trumps everything. So there's no moment now, I think, to be nostalgic for whatever that was, that code name for the 60s. But I think there's still less. I don't like the idea of lessons, but there is still some to be learned. But your question's a good one. That should be the next powwow on that. Anyway, thank you all very much. That's good.